When the fires happened, my daughter Millie said, well, Mama, we've lost everything. And it was like, no, we didn't lose everything. We lost the house, but we didn't lose everything. Right January 1st, I finished a horror that I had been working on that I want to direct. And the whole theme of it was nothing ever really dies. A mother brings her daughter back from the ashes, and then January 7th, the fires hit. And so I put the screenplay on hold, but the theme of that, like if I wrote that, I better kind of live it right now. And what has grown out of that theme for me in my life has been kind of extraordinary. I'm Leigh Hopkins. I am a filmmaker, writer, director, producer, whatever they want me to be, and a mother, mostly, and more importantly, and a person who lived in the Palisades and bought my house within the hour that I saw it 27 years ago. A 1938 Spanish cottage on Iliff Street. I came out from Ohio, and I never really felt like I could find home in Los Angeles. And I just thought, I could imagine living there. It felt like a little sanctuary compared to all these other places. I'd been living in Santa Monica and liked it plenty, but wasn't going to buy anything. And I think I got it because I was the only person who didn't want to tear it down. With every movie, I would fix it up a little bit more and a little bit more. It's like a relationship, you love your house, I'll do a little of this, I'd like this to work. But then the Palisades kind of exploded into the place to live. And it suddenly was like, well, we can't afford it there. The property values keep going up. And a lot of times it was a real fight to keep the house, given the vicissitudes of the business I'm in. But, I love a Western, and it does feel like a dystopian Wild West out there right now. But I felt like I'm on the land, and I'm going to keep my land. And I did. I was the block captain, known as Sarge Hopkins, because I was home a lot as a writer, and I could watch over everything. And I liked knowing my neighbors, and I liked looking out for them. And then there's just the community of great moms. Millie would be able to go to a neighbor 2 doors down. I'd like to read the New York Times. Can I read your New York Times when you're done with it? So every day, Annette would put the New York Times out, and Millie would go and read it. And that is such an extraordinary gift. You're always going to have somebody that kind of comes in and takes it for granted, but I think for the most part, we knew what we had and knew it was rare. I had a feeling 2 weeks prior, and I told a friend in Santa Monica, I asked her, if we have to evacuate, can we come to your place? I've lived here long enough. The winds are just making me uncomfortable. And I said to Millie, I have a weird feeling about it. Stay home. I'm going to go to the doctor, and I'll be back. So I go to the doctor's, and all of a sudden, because I'm Sarge Hopkins, a neighbor said, there's some embers flying. Stop drawing blood. Literally, I called Millie and said, get your medicine packed, get things ready. We're going to evacuate as soon as we get home. I wanted to think, because it's some old house and it's withstood the test of time, that maybe. But at 10 o'clock that night, a neighbor called and said, Karen, my house just burned down. And I said what I said to myself and Millie the next morning when we found out our house was in fact gone, and that was from a neighbor's picture. You had your daughters there, you had your life there. That will never go away. Your house was beautiful and it was a testament to your artistry. I've gone back there as much as possible to see how it feels and to also thank it for all that it brought. I was back yesterday. I've become an amateur landscaper, and I was taking care of the plants, the trees, the lavender. It's imploded. It's all coming back. Roses that I'd forgotten I even had. My daughter Millie is named after my Aunt Millie. There's suddenly a daisy bush in the yard. I didn't plant it. That was her favorite flower. So I feel like, okay, without being too crazy, I think the house is telling me, let's try it again, My daughter got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when she was 13 and was helivaced out of her camp, and that was far more tragic and worrisome than losing a house. We had that house. We had the memory of that house that will always be with us. We were victims of a fire. We are all, but I don't want that to be our identity. That's going to be a waste of time, because like anything in life, we can get past this most certainly, and we're going to, because it's just a far more interesting way to carry on.
There has been a lot of finger pointing in the wake of the LA fires, and one concern we keep hearing again and again is that California has not done enough brush clearance, that foothills and neighborhoods were so overgrown that extra dry brush fueled the intense flames in January. So the question now, how do we find the balance between the nature that we love and its ability to destroy the very communities that love it? From Los Angeles Times Studios, this is Rebuilding LA. I'm Kate Cagle. California is as prone to myth-making as it is to destruction. Take John Muir, known as the founder of national parks. He believed in a wilderness untouched by man. But the truth is that indigenous people had been managing California's forests for thousands of years. But after California became a state, prescribed burns became illegal. It's just one of a series of policy mistakes made over the last 100+ years. And now the state is trying to correct course, and not for the first time. Noah Haggerty with the LA Times has written about this quite a bit and joins us now with the reckoning that is now happening among fire management agencies after January. Noah Haggerty, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be back.
So you've been writing a lot about fire prevention, but first I want to ask you about something topical, and that is the government shutdown. How is that impacting fire prevention at the federal level, especially as we are heading into Santa Ana wind season?
So 40% of U.S. Forest Service employees are furloughed right now, so they're not showing up to day-to-day work. And the U.S. Forest Service is the federal government's largest firefighting service. Now, the wildland firefighters that are responsible for suppressing fires and protecting people's homes are still working. But a lot of this prevention work, doing things like fuel management, thinning the forest, and prescribed burns, is not happening right now. And in California, over half of the forest land in the state is under the management of the federal government.
Can you tell us what they would typically be doing right now if they were working?
In the forest, the typical approach is to do things like mechanical thinning. So they'll go in with equipment that's kind of typically used by logging companies to thin out smaller trees and a lot of this low-level brush that can provide fuel for flames. And so they can go and do that mechanically using a remote control. They call 'em masticators that cut this stuff up, or hand crews that go in. They can also, after they reduce the density, so it's less dangerous, less of a fire hazard, go in with prescribed fire. And when the weather conditions are calm and there's not a risk of a fire getting out of control, they'll go in and burn that stuff to try to get rid of all of that vegetation that can lead to really high intensity fires that can endanger people's homes and lives.
So right now, that's not happening.
That's not really happening on the federal side. Now, the state and the federal government have an agreement. California created this wildfire task force in 2021. That's a partnership between the state and federal government to figure out how to solve this problem. And the agreement is that they're going to kind of split the work here, that the state is going to do about half of it and the federal government is going to do about half of it. So there's still a lot of this work happening on the state side. And there's a lot of different partnerships between the state and different private organizations. And so a lot of this work is still happening. The state is still committed to doing this work. The federal shutdown is just slowing things down a little bit.
Let's talk about policy, because there's been a lot of rethinking around how California should try to prevent wildfires. And you wrote about how for a long time, Southern California was overlooked, that the ecology is totally different in NorCal versus SoCal. Talk a little bit about that.
I mean, this task force that Governor Newsom created in 2021 has kind of been leading all of these wildfire risk reduction prevention efforts in the state. And when he created it in 2021, it was after touring a fuel break project in the Sierras, and it's still called the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force. Like, forest is in the name. And so it was kind of designed to address the fire problem in forests like you see in Northern California. In Southern California, we don't really have forests in the same way. We have these shrublands or chaparral, as they're called, and they have a very different fire regime. They see different kinds of fire at different frequency than in Northern California, and the problems that have developed down here as we've continued to build in wildlands are consequently very different than the problems that Northern California faces.
That's because the chaparral is also made to burn, but less frequently. Is that right?
The current picture in Northern California is that we did a great job suppressing all fires. And so we've seen a lot of buildup of vegetation, which leads to really high intensity fires. And so the solution, reintroduce fire. We've kind of seen the opposite in Southern California. As people have moved into the wildland urban interface, and humans are, going on hikes, they're driving through chaparral ecosystems, the opportunity to set fires has just gone way up. And so we have an opposite problem down here, too much fire. The fire frequency is so quick in chaparral that it can't really recover anymore. And so while Northern California needs to reintroduce fire, we still have to figure out a way to scale the amount of fire that's happening back.
Right, because the fact that the chaparral doesn't have enough chance to come back is allowing other species to come in that are more flammable, right?
Yes, it's kind of a death spiral here. Scientists will call it like the grass-human fire cycle. And it's this feedback loop where humans will ignite fires more frequently. It'll burn through the chaparral. The chaparral needs 30 years at a minimum to recover. But if in places like Malibu Canyon, there's a fire being set every 8 years, it can't recover. And what fills in is invasive grasses that are very flammable and quick to ignite. And that just leads to more ignitions, more fires, more grasses, more ignitions, more fires. And we're just kind of stuck in this cycle. And so it's a much more vexing problem than what the folks in Northern California are experiencing.
It's that yellow mustard you see off the side of the road, right?
Yes, that bone-dry golden grass.
No bueno.
No.
So how is the state now shifting strategy to do better in Southern California?
The focus has really been on vegetation management, this kind of like forest thinning that works well in Northern California. But there's not really an analogous process in Southern California. We don't have a problem where we have like a buildup of vegetation that wasn't really there before. And so thinning it out on like an ecological sense doesn't make a lot of sense. And so the wildfire advocates down here are really pushing the state to kind of move away from this acreage approach in Southern California. It's not about how many acres you can thin and treat. We need to focus on reducing the number of ignitions that happen, making sure people's homes are hardened, they have defensible space so that if there's a fire, they don't burn down, and making sure we do a good job ensuring that firefighters have the resources they need to suppress fires and that people can evacuate safely.
All right. Well, we're going to break down all of that and get into the history also that got us to this moment. But let's take a quick break and then we'll be back with Noah Haggerty.
During one of the most severe windstorms Southern California experienced in more than a decade, the Palisades and Eaton fires ignited, leaving heartbreaking losses in our communities. Now, as we build back, we're building stronger, cleaner, and more resilient. In communities most vulnerable to dangerous weather conditions and wildfires, Southern California Edison is placing power lines underground, hardening the electric system by installing wires with protective coating, and adding advanced technology to help keep communities safe. So when Southern California faces the next storm, the next most severe event,
Copy helicopters, structures adjacent here to Pine Road.
we'll be ready. Learn more at sce.com/disaster recovery.
So a recent story that you wrote took aim at conservationist John Muir, and he's known as the founder of the Sierra Club, the father of national parks here. Of course, he's the reason that we have Yosemite. But you talked about he was part of this myth-making in California, this idea of untouched wilderness where man hadn't interfered. What did he misunderstand about what was happening in California before colonization?
Right. So before Westerners or Europeans moved in, indigenous folks, especially in Northern California, were practicing cultural burns. They were using fire to help thin out the forest and make sure it's healthy in its natural state. And they were redirecting fires and letting them burn naturally. And so those forests in Northern California were seeing fire every 5 to 20 years. It was very much inactive management. Humans are not separate from the environment that they're living in. You know, in a very real sense, we're reliant on it for the air that we breathe, for the water that we drink, all of those things. And when John Muir came in, he visited about 2 decades after California became a state, after the gold rush, and indigenous folks were pushed out of Yosemite Valley. He went and visited Yosemite and thought it was pure wilderness. It was gorgeous and was essentially untouched by man. And he had this idea that in order to protect these wildlands, we had to isolate them from humans. We had to make sure that we were not touching it, we were not interfering with it at all. And part of that was suppressing wildfires. These were things that he saw as being destructive. Like, you look at the land after a fire and you're like, it's destroyed the environment. We didn't preserve it. And so that was one of the driving ideas that led to fire suppression as a policy in California. Now, fire suppression will always be a part of how we manage this problem. It protects people's homes, it saves people's lives. But it allowed that idea to permeate really far into the wildlands, that like any fire was bad. And I'm gonna take aim at another beloved character here.
Bring it.
Smokey the Bear.
Smokey the Bear.
Yes, the Forest Service is kind of bought into this fire suppression thinking as well for slightly different reasons. They were, worried about people's homes, but they were also worried about protecting the forest for things like logging. And so they created this thing called the 10 a.m. policy in the 1930s. That was basically by 10 a.m. the next day, every fire had to be put out. We need to get rid of all of them. And that also extended for a long time. So you had this thinking within what became the National Park Service, all of our beloved public spaces, that fire was bad. It was destructive. It was dangerous to us, but it was also dangerous to the environment. And that comes after a long history of pushing out indigenous folks, including, there's one tribe in Northern California, the Karuk tribe, that they can point to a letter that a Forest Service official said that basically said, in order to protect the forest, if you see an indigenous person running around like a coyote, shoot them.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
So when did California leaders realize that they had it all wrong?
This has been a slow process, but essentially what has happened, especially in Northern California, in all of these forested lands, is without fire over time, this brush and vegetation started to build up and up. There was no fire every few years clearing it out, to the point where forests were like 5 times more dense in some areas than they have historically been.
Whoa.
So a huge increase in density. And when there's a lot of extra vegetation, when a fire comes through, that all is fuel. And so while Northern California's forests had seen low intensity fire that was pretty easy to manage at first, now it's seeing really high intensity fire that can completely destroy a forest and poses a much greater danger. And as this happened more and more frequently, scientists started to understand the role that fire played, something that indigenous folk have known for millennia. And so it started to get incorporated, these ideas, into how we manage the fire problem, especially in Northern California, that we need to be doing things like prescribed burn. We need to have an active role in managing it. You can't just try to create this pristine wilderness by having a hands-off approach. It really takes, taking care of the land that we're living in.
And then you said similarly, Southern California, now we're having too much fire in some areas, that the land is not used to burning twice in the same decade. So the emphasis is different. It's on preventing new fires, right?
Yeah. So in Southern California, before Europeans had settled in the area, the vast majority of fires were started by lightning. Now it's like less than 5%, sometimes as low as 1%. And the frequency of lightning didn't change. It's how much we are igniting fires. And so we're just seeing so much more fire in Southern California than we have before. And like we talked about, that means there's not enough time for the native chaparral to grow back. And so the problems in Southern California are really focused on how do we slow down that frequency to give the chaparral time to breathe. And then when these fires break out, how do we protect people's homes and lives?
Well, and then fast forward to today. Now we've had these 2 destructive fires in January, and now there's over 100 projects right now on the fast track to deal with this issue. That sounds like a lot.
This was an initiative that Governor Newsom created in an executive order after the Palisades fire, because these projects can typically take years to go through the review process to get approval. You have to go through the Environmental Quality Act. You have to go through the Endangered Species Act, the Coastal Act if you're in SoCal and you're near the beach. And all of these are designed to protect the environment, but they can be a slow process. And so Newsom said, instead of going to all of these individual agencies to get these individual approvals, you're going to submit one thing to the Department of Natural Resources and to the Cal EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. They're going to make sure that you comply, and then you can start going. And so instead of it taking years, a lot of these projects have been approved in just months. And the state has also made funding available for these kinds of projects. Back in November, Californians voted for this climate bond, which is $10 billion that'll be used to address climate issues in the state. $1.5 billion of those dollars is going toward wildfire work, wildfire risk reduction. And so the Santa Monica Mountains project, for example, was one that was fast-tracked and also got money from this climate bond.
So that project in the Santa Monica Mountains is about building fuel breaks. Help us visualize, what does that look like?
The idea here is to create a network throughout the wildlands, so the Santa Monica Mountains in this example, where you have strips where there's essentially no vegetation. You've removed all of the chaparral and you just have bare soil. And these are kind of like roadways for wildland firefighters. These are ways to access remote areas and fight the fire safely. It's an area where, that strip is not going to be burning and you can get equipment into it. And so the idea is to create this throughout the Santa Monica Mountains, create miles and miles of this to allow firefighters to have better access. They're starting with a pretty small project in one corner of the Santa Monica Mountains, but the idea is to hopefully expand it someday.
Mm. So you got a chance to actually go up in a helicopter with Supervisor Lindsay Horvath and see them building these breaks. What did you see?
You could see LA County fire crews out there working. And, a fuel break is just like a gap that's, can be around like 100 feet where you're clearing all of the vegetation. And they had like an excavator with like a claw that was like ripping out plants. And they also had 500 goats and 100 sheep out there that are munching on some of this invasive grass.
The goats are so popular.
The goats are so popular, and they are the least controversial part. They're getting universal praise for their work. I also learned that one of the goats actually had a baby while on the job, and she's getting maternity leave.
Wait, what? Well, congratulations to the goat and goat baby. I'm glad everyone loves the goats, top to bottom. But what do we know about how effective the actual fuel breaks are?
Yeah, so there's general support for removing invasive flammable grasses. No one thinks that's a good thing to have invasive grasses. However, fuel breaks that are cutting through healthy chaparral are a bit more controversial. Fire crews will say that fuel breaks are very important for their operations. They serve a strategic purpose, meaning that if a fire is approaching a community, for example, if you have a fuel break that surrounds that community, that is a place where firefighters can get in and access the fire before it hits that community. So it's a very strategic purpose. I mean, if you look at some of the studies on this, there was one in 2023 that looked at recent fires in the National Forest in Southern California. And they found that when firefighters are present, fuel breaks were effective about 70% of the time. But if firefighters were not present, it was about like 10 to 13%. And so the concern here is that if we're creating a network of fuel breaks, we need to make sure that they're actually being used. We can't assume that just because there's a fuel break there, it's going to stop a fire. Embers in Southern California can travel, miles and ignite a spot fire. And so an unmanned fuel break where you don't have firefighters on the ground that are trying to contain it, or you're using, airplanes to drop water along a fuel break, is not really effective in these high wind situations. And on top of that, if you're making a fuel break through healthy chaparral, and if you're not able to consistently maintain it, make sure you're going back there and clearing brush. What grows back is not chaparral, but these invasive grasses. So if you don't maintain it, you can actually make the land more flammable than it was. And once something converts to invasive grass, the odds that you're able to ever get chaparral back there is pretty low. Like some researchers that have tried to kind of restore the ecosystem have found that like 9 out of 10 times that they try to restore an area, they fail.
So potentially effective, but also high maintenance.
Yes, and a big piece of this project, especially if fire crews want to create networks of fuel breaks throughout the Santa Monica Mountains, is are they going to have the personnel and funding to be able to go back every 5 years and make sure that they are clearing that swath of land again? And there's been a big push to streamline the process for getting approval. We have 100 projects underway in California now. But by working fast, some ecologists and fire ecologists are concerned that maybe we're not taking the time to really think about where is the best strategic place to be putting these fuel breaks.
I want to get into what everyday Californians are doing because there's a lot of volunteerism happening as well. We'll get into that after this break when we come back with Noah Haggerty.
Hi, my name's Jordan and I'm a producer at LA Times Studios. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about our new sponsor, Ollie. Like many dog owners, my dog Zooms has become like a child to me. And with that type of responsibility comes the constant need to keep them happy and healthy. One way I make her mealtime a little bit better is through Ollie. Ollie delivers clean, fresh nutrition in 5 drool-worthy flavors, even for the pickiest eaters. Made in U.S. kitchens with the highest quality, human-grade ingredients, Ollie's food contains no fillers, no preservatives, just real food. And here's the thing. Healthier food means a happier pup. More energy, shinier coats, better poops, and more excitement at mealtime. Fill out Ollie's 30-second quiz and they'll create a customized meal plan based on your pup's weight, activity level, and other health info. For any first-timers, Ollie will send out your pup's first box with 2 weeks worth of meals, a free storage container for mess-free serving, and a guide of how to gradually switch them over to their new diet. Dogs deserve the best, and that means fresh, healthy food. Head to ollie.com/rebuildingla, tell them all about your dog, and use code RebuildingLA to get 60% off your welcome kit. Plus, they offer a happiness guarantee on the first box, so if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back. That's OLLIE.com/rebuildingLA and enter code RebuildingLA to get 60% off your first box.
You got recycled metal, you got recycled concrete, you got ash and debris, you've got trees. When they say go, it is all hands on deck for the entire company.
Alan Guy, CEO of Anvil Builders, has years of experience cleaning up after disasters. His crews have been working for months in Altadena, helping to repair communities and prepare the ground for families to return.
There's probably 1,000 trucks on the road every day. So how many loads can the landfill take? Who wants the concrete to make base rock and materials in the local area? Who wants the metal in the local area? What do we do with the burnt down trees? Our company takes a huge amount of pride in doing this work. And I think the healing process starts with seeing, your entire life sent out in dump trucks.
Guy met recently with Rebuild SoCal Partnership to talk about the challenges of the job and the personal stories of the families he met. To hear the full story, stay tuned for the end of the episode.
All right, we are back with Noah Haggerty. So you wrote about all these prevention efforts and building in fuel breaks, but you still have to know if a fire has actually started so you can get there quickly. And you wrote in Orange County, they still do it the old-fashioned way, which is they send out volunteers.
A big part of the solution in SoCal is reducing the ignitions that are happening. This is things like arson, cars that are sparking, people that are flicking a cigarette into the grass, kids that are unsupervised. And so in Orange County, there's this program by the Irvine Ranch Conservancy where whenever there's a red flag day, so there's severe winds and dry brush, there's a lot of risk for a wildfire to not only start, but really spread and endanger lives and homes. They send out a text blast to 300 volunteers who then disperse throughout the wildlands in Orange County, and they watch. They're looking for any ignitions that might be happening, and they're also just looking out for any potential behavior that could lead to a fire, like someone's car that's sparking or someone that's not watching their kid that's running around.
Is there any kind of metric or proof that the volunteers in Orange County are helpful?
It's kind of hard to count the fires that didn't happen. This is a big problem in Southern California. And there hasn't been a lot of studies yet to look at whether these programs are effective. And honestly, there's not a lot of programs out there like what Orange County is doing. But the experts that I've spoken with have said that this is exactly what they would want to see in Southern California. You want people out there to help prevent ignition, but also just help educate the public about what is safe and what is not, especially on these high wind days. It's a big thing to be able to spot a fire early, but it's a huge thing to have a community that is informed, that knows that they have to be extra careful on these days, that know that they shouldn't be doing things like lighting campfires or should be really careful about their actions that day.
It seems like more eyes on the ground can't hurt. How can we make it so that more communities adopt this kind of strategy?
It's a great question, and one that Southern California has been trying to grapple with a lot in recent years, and especially after the Palisades fire. You'll see a lot of communities up north that have done a really great job at getting community buy-in. For them, that might be doing things like brush clearance or prescribed burns, but it hasn't really had the same effect yet in Southern California. Some people think it's because in Northern California, the people that face fires is mostly these smaller mountain towns, and so it's easier to get buy-in from a whole community. They also had the 2018 Camp Fire, which was a real cultural reckoning and shock for people up there. And so Southern California is a little bit behind on this community buy-in. However, we can see what Northern California did that was pretty effective. One thing is they'll send people into their elementary schools to talk about fire, what the fire history was, what's different now, and what people should be doing. I've heard some of the fire safety advocates down here talk about seatbelts. Like, we had this public campaign to get people to start wearing seatbelts in cars, and one of the first things they did was to go into schools and tell kids about how important they are so that the kids can go home and make their parents feel guilty. And so that's one technique, but it's generally just a slow process of, people within the community taking the initiative to do something and just really slowly, like, talking to their neighbors. You'll have things like block captains where in each neighborhood, there's one person who's in charge of making sure everyone knows how to evacuate, what they should be doing on these dangerous days. And so it really is kind of a grassroots process that starts from the bottom up, and it just takes time.
So all these projects going on right now that you've been writing about are about how Californians can live better with this fire risk. How optimistic are you that these changes are going to make a difference?
I think it'll be a slow process, but there's been a lot of movement in the past decade, especially on what's happening in Southern California. I mean, just a decade or 2 decades ago, we didn't even really understand. Scientists didn't fully understand what was happening in Southern California. They didn't understand what had evidence to back it up yet. But people that are really pushing for us to do something on this issue are saying that, like, we got to try something. At some point, you have to put the experiment on the ground and see if it stops a fire. And so just the fact that we have projects out there that are experimenting with this, I think, is a huge step for Southern California.
All right. Los Angeles Times wildfire reporter Noah Haggerty, thank you so much for your time today and coming back.
Thanks for having me.
We'll have Noah's stories up in our show page. And that's it for us this week. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll be right back here next week. Now, a word from our sponsors.
The following is a paid message from Rebuild SoCal Partnership. Sponsor has no editorial oversight.
Anvil Builders has been working for months in Altadena, clearing the remains of homes that burned down during the devastating fire. Anvil CEO Alan Guy helped clean the Paradise Fire of 2018 and many others. Guy recently met John Switalski, the executive director of Rebuild SoCal Partnership in Altadena. They talked about the challenges Anvil faces and the people whose homes they are helping to rebuild.
Today we're going to be loading ash and debris, both excavators, Abel, Chris. We're doing that. Going to be watering. Got to be ready with the trucks when they're going in and out. Got to make sure traffic control is doing their thing.
What does it take to get prepared and to clean up these hazardous sites with efficiency?
It takes a lot. A lot of it was our staffing. It's all about our people, right? It's all the people that manage it, the local workforce. We always take on the most challenging job. We always say our people thrive in those environments.
And then on a site specific, like we're seeing here, what goes into planning to actually do that work once you hit the ground?
We got to figure out where everything's going. You got recycled metal, you got recycled concrete, you got ash and debris, you've got trees. When they say go, it is all hands on deck for the entire company to get people, resources, everything ready to go to start the cleanup process, to rebuild these communities. There's probably 1,000 trucks on the road every day. So how many loads can the landfill take? Who wants the concrete to make base rock and materials in the local area? Who wants the metal in the local area? What do we do with the burnt down trees?
Fire has scarred the landscape, but also scarred the communities. What does it mean to you and to your company to take part in the recovery?
Our company takes a huge amount of pride in doing this work. And I think the healing process starts with seeing, your entire life sent out in dump trucks. It's very emotional, as you can imagine. We found pictures, wedding rings, family heirlooms, like you name it.
You and your employees are making connections throughout the community by doing that. How does that permeate through the culture of your company?
Super cool to see the appreciation from people that have lost everything. You know, they'll bring them donuts. And they're the ones that lost everything, and they're bringing our guys and girls donuts, which is really cool to see.
Anvil foreman Philip Thompson is with his crew every day, and he has met families who have lost everything.
Everybody has to have a release, and that's what we try to do for the homeowners. Give them a release where they can talk about what's going on. We've actually prayed with people to help them through the process. We've cried with them. Again, very emotional, sorry. But that's how touching this is for all of us.
What is required of your company to make sure that the hazardous materials don't impact your folks?
The workers have to have a 40-hour HAZWOPER training. It's put on by either a union, or they can do it themselves, or we offer it. It was like 2.5 million tons of debris coming off these sites, hundreds of thousands of truckloads. So there's hazardous stuff in the soil that needs to be hauled to the dump.
Anvil Superintendent Manny Santos is responsible for the overall operation of each work site.
Try to get the metal out first, the concrete, and then ash debris last. Once we get all that done, we do our final scrape, which would be a 6-inch on any raised foundations or soil areas that fall within the ash footprint. So these guys right now, you'll see behind me, they're lining the trucks with plastic. The hot zone is where the material is getting moved and getting loaded. Anytime we remove that material and move it and disturb it, we have to be in full PPE. We are working 7 days a week, and the reason why is because this job needs to be completed in a timely fashion, and we're sacrificing that for these homeowners because we want them to be back here and we want them to be able to rebuild as fast as possible.
Can you tell us a little bit about your company?
We're signatory to the operators, laborers, and carpenters, and they're spectacular partners in this because they have qualified people that are ready to go to work. Our whole focus in our organization is making sure the field is successful. They're the ones that do the work.
We like to think of infrastructure is all around us. It's everything we touch and feel. It's schools, hospitals, in addition to roads and bridges. What are your thoughts on the challenges of infrastructure throughout California?
I think California and the country as a whole, we're behind in developing and maintaining our infrastructure. There's a lot of new infrastructure needed. There's a lot of old infrastructure that needs to be upgraded. It's great for the economy, it creates jobs.
It seems that the Army Corps has done a pretty good job in getting companies like you and others to get this work done quickly.
The Eaton fire and the Palisades fire has been the quickest and most efficient cleanup in California since we've started doing this work, I think. It took all the state agencies to make this happen. I mean, it's probably the most expensive disaster in the US. I mean, it's a huge task, 5 months from start to finish. It was monumental what they all did together.
Alan, thanks for joining us here in Altadena. This is a really remarkable effort in all the logistics that went into this, and to get this 95% done in just about 5 months.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Rebuilding LA is hosted and reported on by me, Kate Cagle. Our senior producer and showrunner is Megan Larson. Our associate producers are Jordan Patterson and Megan Botel. Our camera operators are Michael Siegel, Carter Wells, and Peter Grayson. Our director of post-production is Patrick Stewart, and our senior sound recording engineer is Nick Norton, with audio engineering help from David Iskadarian and motion graphics by Dougal Henkin. Our video editors are Daniel Flesher, Michael Ray, and Peter Grayson. Ben Church is our senior coordinating producer. Our podcast marketing manager is Bryn Jura, and our product marketing director is Becca Dorman. Our general counsel at the Los Angeles Times is Jeff Glasser. Special thanks to President and Chief Operating Officer of the Los Angeles Times, Chris Argentieri, and the Executive Editor of the Los Angeles Times, Terry Tang. And one final thank you to all the residents of Altadena, Malibu, and the Pacific Palisades for sharing your stories with us. Rebuilding LA is co-created by LA Times Studios President Anna Magzanian and executive produced and co-created by Darius Derrickson.